Story 1, Cairo. I got separated from my tour group for 15 minutes, and the number of men who surrounded me and wouldn't take no for an answer was terrifying. My heart was racing until I finally spotted my group. Story 2. This exact same thread pops up pretty often, and one of the recent ones I read had unanimous consensus that Port-au-Prince, Haiti, was in a league of its own when it came to scary cities. I've never been. Maybe the people telling the stories were more vivid, but it sounds scarier than any of these places. Story 3. Was in St. Louis with my cousin and we crossed that bridge. East St. Louis has got to be the most dangerous feeling place I've ever been. Streetlights were busted out at night, everything run down and abandoned, bullet holes in the stop signs, etc. We pulled up the GPS and got out of there really quickly. Story 4. New Orleans shortly after Katrina. I grew up mostly in the Bronx and Harlem, so I have a pretty high bar for this is way too hood. But that was a whole different level. Like the Soundview houses mixed with The Walking Dead. Story 5. I don't think I was in any actual danger, but I got on the wrong bus in Cancun and got taken out of the hotel zone and into God knows where. I kept thinking, well, the bus is back home going a loop, so I just need to stay on the bus and he'll eventually go back to the hotel and I'll get off then. After about an hour or so, everyone else had gotten off the bus, and it was just me and the driver. We wound up in some random neighborhood. He parks, opens the door, turns and looks at me, and gestures for me to get out. I speak zero Spanish. He speaks zero English, but I make it as clear as possible I'm not getting off the bus. This was before smartphones, so I couldn't use any translation tools. I just kept shaking my head no and repeating the name of my hotel. It's around 11 p.m., and I was scared out of my mind, not of cartels or anything like that, but just being lost and not being able to communicate with anyone. He eventually gets off and wanders around outside talking on the phone, then gets back on the bus and starts driving back in the direction we came. Eventually, I start recognizing landmarks and see we're close to the hotel district and start thanking him profusely. He stops a few blocks from the hotel and again gestures for me to get out. I give him all the money in my wallet as a thank you and hurry back to my hotel. Story 6. Memphis, Tennessee. Everyone on the street seemed to be some kind of scammer. A music shop we were in got held up by a man with a knife while we were there. Hardy, Arkansas was also pretty weird. That was the only place I have ever felt hated specifically because I am from the north. Story 7. I don't think I've ever been scared in a city, but some of those small half-dead towns in Appalachia give off the kind of negative vibes that make milk curdle and animals scary. Story 8. El Salvador. I saw a body in the street in the tourist beach area. The police had set up checkpoints that were boulders just rolled into the middle of the highway that seemed like shakedown points. Overall sense of danger in every town or city we went. But I just want to say I didn't experience anything personally dangerous and everyone we interacted with was wonderful and a lot of fun. We partied with our cab driver who served as an all-day tour guide and security advisor. Hotel staff was super accommodating and the country itself is a beautiful tropical paradise. I heard it's much safer now and I'd love to go back. Story 9. Port-au-Prince. As we were wandering around lost and the sun was going down, I realized, hey, I guess I can't necessarily land anywhere in the world and be fine. Thank God for the English-speaking gentleman who stumbled upon us and pointed us to the children's shelter where we were staying. Story 10. Delhi, India. To me, it was scary not because I feared for my safety or life, but because I was overwhelmed by the number of people. On my first attempt to use their subway, I had a panic attack and ended up walking out of the station. I had never experienced being in crowds that size, and that was quite scary to me. Story 11. The eastern side of the city of Cleveland. I've been to a lot of states and a lot of sketchy places, but that looked like a war zone. For those of you from Cleveland or Ohio in general, I'm talking about the section that runs along State Route 20 into downtown. Story 12. I don't remember the name. It was so small. West Virginia or Virginia, we were in the mountains and had no idea which part we were in. It really got a Deliverance vibe as people came out of their tiny, dilapidated houses to stand on the porch and watch us drive through. Some had shotguns. Most of them just came out to stand on the porches and silently watch us. I know my husband felt it too since we just kept driving, trying to get to a highway. We had pulled off to find a tourist spot, and the directions and global positioning system were terrible. Neither the directions we downloaded nor the global positioning system were correct. We ended up having to turn around a few times, since the road would just end. Story 13. Some suburb of Salt Lake City. We stopped in a grocery store on a road trip to do some shopping, and it was like walking into a cult, complete with sister wives pushing multiple carts with half a dozen children trailing behind each. The scary thing was how they were looking at us like we were the ones who were insane. Story 14. Mekelle, Ethiopia. That is the first and only time I felt singled out and threatened in any city, despite the fact that I am male, tall in comparison to the locals, and in a group. We were 5 people and none of us felt safe. Story 15. I absolutely love Asheville, North Carolina, but when I was 19, I moved there by myself for a culinary school internship. This was in 2003. At the time, Buncombe County was going through a huge meth crisis. There were times I was looking for cheap or free street parking and found areas I didn't think were sketchy, but near this one pocket park where I had parked a few times, a homeless guy saw me one night and called out to me. He said, "Hey man, I've seen you park here a few times and you come back late. Just so you know, you probably don't want to do that. There are rumors going around that you're going to get jumped and mugged." I don't know if he was lying or not, but I gave him $5, said thanks, and never parked there again. There was another time I was driving around the city with my windows down because I didn't have air conditioning in the car, and I was at a stoplight. This dude came up and half crawled into the passenger side window and was like, "Yo, give me a ride up the block. I need a ride and you just got this whole car to yourself." He tried to open the door from the inside, and I hit the gas, and luckily he kind of fell out or pulled back. He was 100% going to rob me, which is what I felt in the moment, and I had it confirmed later by some coworkers. There was a tiny little Guatemalan dishwasher, Miguel, who was a happy little prankster, always had a smile, always had a joke, even though he didn't speak English well. One of those guys who looked 14 but was probably 30. He always took out the trash at the end of the night, never had a problem until one week he got mugged twice at knife point just going to the dumpster. He didn't have anything. He was at work as a dishwasher, but they took his cheap watch and the second night took his apron. After that, we always had one of the big chefs go with him, armed with a long kitchen saber-style knife we used for cutting meat. I never really felt too unsafe, but I learned where to go and not go after dark pretty quickly, and I learned what parts of town to just avoid as a scrawny white boy with main plates on my car. I'd go back in a heartbeat, and I don't want to disparage Asheville at all. Great people, great city. But in my admittedly limited experience, there were a few scary moments that made me realize how naive and young I was. Story 16. Needles, California. I saw the sign for it many times driving to Las Vegas and back. Around 2010, I took the other way to follow the Colorado River south and see Lake Havasu and another spot further south. Needles was on the way. I didn't plan to stop, but I was curious to see it. Not dangerous in some urban violence kind of way, but major creepy like a horror movie or an episode of The Twilight Zone. No one on the streets. Almost no one on the roads. Nothing looked open or alive. I did not want to stop. Felt like the kind of place the earth could just swallow you up with no warning and no trace. I've been to ghost towns, I've been to ruins, I've seen plenty of abandoned homes, businesses, highway junctions with just rubble. This was just really spooky. A place that should be alive had the pallor of death. It was unnerving, and I could not wait to get out of there. There was a change in highways and the signs were not clear or maintained, like an intentional misdirection leading to hell. That's what it felt like. Story 17. New Orleans. Granted, it's not as dangerous as half the cities on the list, but I grew up in a really safe town in Europe, and within my first 48 hours in New Orleans, I was threatened with a machete and my friends were robbed at gunpoint. Story 18. As someone who has never left the United States, Atlanta. Hear me out. I liked Atlanta. Wonderful people, but the neighborhoods I saw were the worst out of the major cities I've been to. Absolutely horrible. Story 19. I've been to Detroit many times in my life, and back in the 1990s to early 2000s it was pretty bad. But now it's not any worse than any other big city, especially if you're in the more touristy areas during the day. The same thing with New York City, which I visited last summer. For my money, the only time I've ever felt legitimately unsafe in an American city in broad daylight was Cincinnati, Ohio. We came off the highway basically onto the front lawn of a courthouse or a big government building, and there were multiple people who seemed drugged out of their minds on the steps. They aggressively went towards the road, stopped cars, and ran into traffic like the zombies in 28 days later. This was at around 4 in the afternoon. Story 20. Manila, mostly because the friend I was going to visit had made some enemies with organized crime there. Apparently, they had threatened to kill him if they saw him hanging around Manila again. Of course, he didn't tell me this until after I landed. Anyway, I felt fine walking around without him. Phnom Penh felt really sketchy just because there was so much obvious underage prostitution going on, and nobody seemed to care. It was like the Wild West. I got the F out of there as soon as possible. Tijuana feels dangerous, but I've been there 10 to 15 times and never had any problems. I got lost on a Friday night with no cell phone service, walking around in the dark, and all the locals I ran into were very helpful. Not one person tried anything sketchy. Honestly, the most nervous I've ever been in any city was Singapore. I was nervous about the police because they have really strict laws. Even chewing gum is illegal there. Story 21. Dnipro, Ukraine, particularly its outskirts and right bank. It doesn't help that I'm an American who was walking around during a time of war. There are blown-up buildings and Soviet infrastructure that has been poorly maintained over the years. I was later told that going there alone was a huge mistake by other Ukrainians who even live closer to the front line. Story 22. The open drug market area in Vancouver is crazy. Thousands of bent, doubled over young people mainly smoking or snorting drugs in the open go on for blocks, and it was a nightmare to witness. I was only driving through it. Story 23. I was there only for a short time. My life was threatened, and when a dragon showed up to burn down the city, I tried to escape as fast as possible. Cannot recommend. Story 24. Baghdad in 2005. Worked there as a private contractor. Lived both in the green zone and red zone. We were traveling low profile one day and got caught in a political rally by the Mahdi army. Thank God we had an old car with darkly tinted windows, or you would not be reading this. Story 25. Not for any particular reason but Los Angeles. I live in a small Midwestern town, but my older brother moved there when I was little, and I flew out to visit him for a few days in 2023. Looking out the window of the plane and seeing how the city stretched to the horizon made me realize how insanely big it is. The whole time I was there, I had this lingering sense of megalophobia, like there was a constant voice saying, "This place is way too big," which nearly boiled over when I tried walking to a coffee shop near his apartment and realized I had my sense of direction mixed up. It was nice to see him and do a bit of sightseeing, but I can't imagine I'll want to go back anytime soon. Story 26. Rochester, New York. I went to college there, and even though I never was really scared per se, it's the definition of a ghost city. There were never any people walking around during the day or at night. The only place I really remember seeing people hang out regularly was an illegal skate park at night. Fun memories, but a really, really odd city. Story 27. I once went to an affluent suburb of Chicago in Illinois for a job interview. It was the week of Halloween. All of the houses had harvest decorations up instead of Halloween decorations, and I kept thinking, this town has to be run by some kind of a weird cult. Story 28. Egypt. We were walking down the street, and a man in traditional clothing asked us where we were going. Here, a shortcut for the lovely tourists, he said. The shortcut ended up being a makeshift table with loads of aftershaves on it. He was very persistent in trying to sell us something, but we walked away and were greeted by, "Now it's my turn to rip you off," by another guy. Story 29. I would say Baltimore, not because of crime, but because of how the city keeps tourists in one small section while it ignores the rest of the city. It's a beautiful, walkable city, but government neglect is just terrible. Story 30. Years ago, while driving across the United States, I took the wrong highway and ended up in Cleveland late at night. I stopped at a gas station to ask for directions back to the highway, and the attendant said, First thing you do is lock your doors. I also spent one night in Memphis in a hotel and had no desire to go out and explore. I was young, and the neighborhood was ugly and industrial looking. Story 31. Some of the sketchy parts of Cali, Colombia are really terrifying. Normally, you can be fairly safe if you stick to good parts of the city and take normal precautions. Some of the bus routes I would take went through very bad parts of the town where it feels like a different city. People with no shoes walking through garbage and people on drugs. All the buildings are boarded up, and military vehicles are roaming around. Story 32. A little place called Dunkirk, New York, right on Lake Erie. I went skateboarding at about 10 at night to clear my head, and I was approaching the beach when a few guys stopped me to ask for money. I told them I didn't have any, and they just gave off such a vibe. Then they asked me where I was going, and I just got out of there, looking over my shoulder the entire ride home.